In a few minutes' time, we're going to be joined by the brilliant Dr. Aseem Malhotra, who's a cardiologist, a big author of a brilliant book called The Piopi Diet, big supporter of low carb, high fat, eating real food. You've probably noticed he's been on virtually every TV channel going with his comments recently about explaining how metabolic syndrome is the underlying cause of certainly the severity of COVID and the effects of COVID. But anyway, we'll get to see him in just 1 or 2 minutes. It is our last but 2 shows, I think. Tomorrow we've got Malcolm Kendrick, followed by the brilliant Unwins on Monday in our final show. And then on Monday we will be announcing the winner of our 2 competitions. One competition, of course, was we asked you to tell us what you cooked for the first time during lockdown, hopefully something nutritional, and we're going to have a competition, announce that prize on Monday. And the other competition was we were bringing you a food fact virtually every single day. I think we missed 1 or 2. And all you need to do today, tomorrow, today or tomorrow, is go back to all the different, in the series, 40 plus programs now, write down what the food fact was, just the name of the food that we were talking about. And then during tomorrow and Monday, on the comments, just say how many you got. Oh, crikey. No, then everybody else will see what you've done and copy it.
We're doing an email, sending it to an email.
Oh, we're sending it to an email, says Jack. Good morning, Jack.
Morning.
You're okay today?
I'm perfectly fine today.
You're perfectly fine today. Do you want to say hello to everybody or not?
I do.
There you do. There's Jack. Nice and chilled. Hasn't he done great? 18 years old. Produced every show. We're on show 48 today. He's been absolutely brilliant. Today's food fact, by the way, is a way to, if you like your noodles, if you like your spaghetti, you like to cook things and put it on top of spaghetti, but if you're trying to lose weight, cut down on the carbohydrates, there's several ways you can replace your spaghetti or your pasta or your noodles. You can, of course, do courgette. You can buy a spiralizer and make your own out of courgettes. They're absolutely fantastic. Or there is a new thing called shirataki, I think that's how you pronounce it. And there's loads of different brands. I just picked one brand there. I'm not associated with them. I just know they taste great. And what they are glucomannan, which is the root of the konjac plant, made into long noodles. They look just like, well, transparent pretty much when you put them in the frying pan. But if you fry them up with spices and herbs and all that good stuff, they take on the flavor. And they are just fiber, so you get your fiber up, which is important. Your carbs right down, they're virtually 0 carbs, and it makes your meal look like it would normally if you were on a high carb diet. Right, that's today's food fact. I want to talk no more about anything else other than get the brilliant Dr. Aseem Malhotra on. How are you, my friend? Yeah, you're looking well, looking well. Have you got any sleep in the last month? You've been everywhere.
I'm trying, mate. I'm trying. It's a lot of stuff to do, isn't it? I've got to do my own stuff, got to do my consultations, got to look after my house, do the cleaning, the cooking, and then in between all of that, try and get when I get the opportunity, just try and spread the positive public health messages, really.
Well, you've been getting worldwide. My friend called me from India and said you'd been on mainstream television in India as well.
Yeah, I don't know about television. Have I been on television in India? Probably, yeah.
Yeah, you were.
I've done quite a lot of stuff, but Times of India have covered quite a lot around how the Indian diet has really been, unfortunately, has been changed considerably from the traditional diet to one which has a lot of Western food, a lot of refined carbs and sugar. So I was kind of just highlighting and busting a few myths with Times of India as well.
Brilliant. Where should we start today? In fact, let me start. In fact, I'll come to that one in a moment. Tell us the latest that you've been discovering. What have the press wanted to talk about mainly? What's your key messages?
Yeah, so I think as you probably know, Steve, yesterday Boris Johnson announced, or certainly through the Times newspaper on the front page, that he's now going to take tackling obesity very seriously, very much in relation to the fact that he got particularly unwell, as you know, compared to his cabinet colleagues who are much slimmer. And something that I highlighted in the media then clearly struck a chord with him, because he's attributed his weight to the reason he got particularly sick from COVID-19. And I think, he's turning that into a positive message now, which I think is fantastic, that he's realized that obesity needs to be tackled. And I think more specifically, it's not just that, it's about his own perception of of what measures need to be taken. So it had been, he had come out and said several months ago that he was considering to overturn the sugary drinks tax. Now he said he's not going to do that, in essence. So he realizes that there are public health measures that government need to support and implement if we are going to really tackle the obesity crisis. So that's really positive news. So that I think that's a really good sign that hopefully we can start to collectively do more to really reverse these epidemics of diet-related disease, obesity, and type 2 diabetes. I spoke on RT UK TV yesterday. They interviewed me about it, and I just reiterated, I think, a few of the key points that I will be telling Boris. In fact, one thing I need to also share with you, Steve, was that after I'd highlighted this issue in the mainstream media about the link between weight and obesity, and in reference to Boris Johnson, Matt Hancock, the Secretary for Health, asked me to email him more information on this link between excess body fat and COVID-19 complications. So I did email him a lot of information, including my European Scientist article. I think that may well have had an impact, certainly in influencing, Boris's announcement. But the key messages, I think, are still that obesity is a big issue. The bigger issue is excess body fat that starts even at much lower body mass indexes. So people who have, normal body mass index in America, it's estimated only 1 in 3 of those people are metabolically healthy. Right. And of course, obesity is a marker of a much bigger problem. So I think that needs to be addressed, because it means we're all vulnerable. And it isn't just applying, if we apply these same principles across the whole population, that you need to improve your diet for your overall metabolic health, then we hit many more people, we'll save many more lives, we'll reduce a lot of unnecessary suffering.
And I haven't spoken to you for a couple of weeks because you've been really, really busy. Has that trend of severity of COVID carried on the way that you highlighted about 4 weeks ago, that most people that were having complications, or many that sadly died, were suffering with either high blood pressure, obesity, diabetes type 2. Has that trend carried on the same as we're further into this?
Yeah, in fact, actually only on Thursday, more information was released by Public Health England that revealed that 25%, a quarter of all the deaths of people from COVID-19 in the UK is because of diabetes. Now, they haven't specified whether it's type 1 or type 2, but we know 90% of diabetes is type 2, so it's likely they're going to be the biggest proportion of those deaths, unfortunately. So that really just, again, underlies the fact that metabolic disease is a big risk factor for complications. Having said that, without wanting to, we've also got to strike a balance between fear-mongering, and I think a lot of people who are listening to this, and understandably people with obesity and type 2 diabetes and all these conditions have extra fear. The context is still this, you are most likely to survive if you get the virus. And I think that's really important. The question is, how can you optimize your immune system? How can you reduce the risk of complications? And that, of course, means making sure your metabolic health is as best as it can be. Even if you have these underlying conditions, it's about, making sure you're cutting out the ultra-processed food, you're eating a healthy diet, you're getting enough sleep, you're exercising moderately. So that's really crucial as well, a really crucial message to point out.
On the positive note, and you've taught me this ever since the very first time we met, doesn't matter whether it's diabetes, high blood sugar, obesity, as long as you're getting on the right path, things can change really quickly. And within 21 days, huge things can happen in your body, and therefore get on the right path, get on the right journey, and every day you're metabolically getting fitter, healthier. And I think you said once that within 21 days as a doctor you've seen massive improvements in patients.
Yeah, I mean, I give that advice regularly to my patients, Steve, both in the NHS and privately. And yes, significant number of these people do improve their metabolic health very quickly within a few weeks. But I think the key point is that's great for individuals, but I think of myself as someone who analyzes research, looks at things independently, and then I ask myself, how can I help my patients and how can I help the population as well? Because we're all interlinked, and of course, this problem is a population issue. And whatever happens in the population will directly or indirectly affect us as individuals as well. Therefore, we all have a role to think about what can we do to support our communities as well. So I think, obviously it's something I highlighted in my book, The Pioppi Diet. I'll be updating that soon in something hopefully quite big. which will be announced in the next few weeks, in terms of just giving people a bit more specific, concentrated advice about what they can do to improve their immune resilience, if you like, and metabolic health, and then protect the health service moving forward. But on that note, something that, the title of this particular discussion with you is about why do doctors know so little about nutrition. It's really rooted in the fact that we don't get any formal, real good training, certainly in relation between how food affects your metabolic health. And there was a recent publication in the journal BMJ Nutrition carried out by medical students and some junior doctors. And what was really interesting is that there was a widespread, clear acknowledgement amongst doctors and medical students that they felt that patients would expect them to know about nutrition and that it's an important issue. But the overwhelming majority, 75% roughly, of junior doctors basically felt that they didn't have the knowledge, the time, nor confidence, all three of those things, to actually advise patients about healthy eating. And this sort of fits in with previous research. I'd written a letter with a number of doctors, nutritionists, sports scientists a few years ago to the Medical Schools Council and the General Medical Council, saying that we need evidence-based lifestyle education needs to be compulsory, mandatory within medical education, both undergraduate and postgraduate. Because we're also, as postgraduate, as doctors, we're constantly having to update our level of knowledge, and we have to, get so many credits every year that we're kind of learning new things, and we're, updating ourselves with the latest evidence. So unfortunately, that hasn't really been brought into practice yet in a widespread way. Bristol University is doing a lot of good work, and they've managed to get nutrition education within the curriculum over there, but it's not widespread, and it needs to be there. And just to give you one example, you might be quite shocked by this. A couple of interesting statistics. So Swiss Re, a number of years ago, did a big survey, and not that long ago, actually, only a few years ago. And they found that 92% of doctors still thought that eating fat would cause heart disease. 54% of doctors and 40% of nutritionists thought that cholesterol in food will raise blood cholesterol. So there's a huge level of lack of knowledge amongst the profession. And only 1 in 3 doctors, Steve, were able to identify an oily fish. So, the reality is within our group, certainly, and, there's a bit of an echo chamber here, but it's obviously, hopefully having more impact into the mainstream. A lot of people may be shocked to hear that. And in fact, a lot of, and I always approach my consultations with patients as it's a two-way process. I'm there to try and reassure them, to help them to diagnose things, to, help them deal with whatever condition they may have or not have. But at the same time, I see every consultation that I have with my patients as a learning experience for me too. And I learn a lot from my patients. And I think we need, more humility and less hubris amongst doctors. And there are a lot of very good doctors out there that I know also listen to their patients and find it very interesting, the information. Or, for example, a lot of patients coming to their GP now who've managed to send their type 2 diabetes into remission. But I think doctors themselves also need to be open-minded to those patients that are being helped, and just be open-minded to the evidence and research that they're being presented with, because, there are so many journal publications every year that doctors really can't keep up. And unfortunately, the guidelines, as you know, lags behind the science. And you add in then on top of that all the commercial interests involved, and the food industry and the pharmaceutical industry, who are going to try and resist those changes because they profit from outdated or in many ways commercially corrupted information. And that contributes to this whole epidemic of misinformation that we have within healthcare. But we know what needs to be done. We just have to keep advocating for it and making as much news as we can, and to highlight it. Shine. There's a saying: sunlight is a very potent disinfectant.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's take one step back. The first thing we want to get across to everybody is we're not having a go at any doctor, any nurse, any surgery, the NHS have been brilliant throughout this entire, well, they're always brilliant, but more than ever, the light has been shone on the NHS, and they've been fantastic. What we're talking about is a fundamental need to change education as you learn to become a doctor, because everything is about, at the moment, if I understand, the whole 5, 6, 7 years of med school is all about identify what the problem is, look for the main drug that will fix that problem. And we don't do much, as far as I understand, around prevention. It's all about cure, cure, cure. What do you do when a patient comes in? How do you cure them? How do you identify? But very little around prevention. And I've got a saying that says that, an ounce of prevention is worth a ton of curing. Is it that we've got to try and change a little bit of focus? You know, if food isn't man's best medicine, if most things relate to diet, should we be changing over as soon as possible education with doctors and people in this area to be more about how do you prevent these things from happening in the first place, understanding, and there's one of our little logos, copying something you said in the press the other day: eat real food, protect the NHS, save lives. Maybe that's the starting day one med school you come in. That's the slide behind. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, you're right, Steve. And I think just in addition to that, one of the things I highlight in my lectures is I quote David Sackett, who is the late Canadian epidemiologist, considered one of the forefathers of what we call the evidence-based medicine movement. And one of his quotes is 50% of what you learn in medical school will turn out to be either outdated or dead wrong within 5 years of your graduation. The trouble is nobody can tell you which half.
Yeah.
So you have to learn on your own. So I think that what that highlights as well, Steve, is that medicine itself is not a precise, exact science. It's more, it's an art, and the part of that art is using probabilities and statistics and information that we get from published research and then applying it to our individual patient.
Yeah.
So I think that is also, there's a perception issue amongst many doctors, even amongst the public, about what modern medicine itself, and we talk about pharmacotherapy, et cetera, and operations of it have achieved. And of course we do, there's some amazing things that are done. There are lots of life-saving, medications, antibiotics, for example. One of the greatest discoveries in the last century to combat infection has saved countless lives. And of course, drugs have a role, for blood pressure, for diabetes control, for reducing risk of heart disease. But those actual individual benefits, when you break down the data, are actually very, very small, certainly much, much, much smaller than what people would believe them to be. And are only really beneficial in the highest risk group. So when you look at all of that, and then you think about the fact that we're not addressing the root causes as you've highlighted, it's easy to understand why we've got much of the problems in healthcare that we have today. That's something we need to try and work on combating through education. Another interesting, bit of information just to give you perspective on how perceptions are. How there are misperceptions about modern medicine. So one interesting study looked at, they surveyed public health students actually to ask them how much they thought that and this is in America, so how much they thought that modern medicine had contributed to increasing life expectancy since mid-1800s. So in America, we've added about 40 years of life to average life expectancy in the United States since 1850, okay? And they asked these students recently, how much of that 40-year increase in life expectancy do you think was due to modern medicine? Now, what do you think? If I asked you, Steve, how many of those 40 years, just as a guess, would you think is because of modern medicine? Things that we do in healthcare, hospitals, drugs, etc.
Do you want me to give you my honest opinion?
Yeah.
Okay. So, well, my understanding is if you take out childhood deaths, which blur the numbers, an adult male living in the 1870s lived longer than an adult male living today, where life expectancy was longer. If you got through childhood and you got to an adult as a male in the 1870s, where there was an overabundance of real natural food, your life expectancy was longer then than it is today. So I would say that modern medicine has had zero effect on life extension.
Well, yeah, it's not quite zero, but first of all, to tell you the answer, that 80% of these students, these educated people, they answered that they felt 32 out of 40 year increase in life expectancy was because of modern medicine. 32 out of the 40 years. Okay. The closest estimates is, of course, these things are always very difficult to be absolutely precise on, but essentially this particular study determined that probably about 3.5 years of that 40-year increase in life expectancy was because of modern medicine. Of course, well, that's going to be about infection control, use of vaccinations, emergency care, treatment, coronary care units for people having heart attacks, etc. So yeah, most of that increased life expectancy was because of public health interventions, which was about better sanitation, safe drinking water, smoke-free buildings, seatbelts in cars. All these things were the ones that have contributed. Better working environments, Steve. People, if you go back to early 20th century, people were at risk of even, certain manual laborers, for example, before there were proper health and safety things introduced, were at risk of dying at work. Operating machinery, for example, falling down potholes, all sorts of reasons. So people going up chimneys, etc. So that was also a big factor. And I think
absolutely.
We need to remember history, because you see that perception out there amongst the public also influences. This is also there amongst the medical profession. This is about there amongst this misinformation's there amongst policymakers, politicians. So if you think about it, if they have the wrong idea or perception or incorrect facts, that will influence so many things: what policies we introduce, how we manage healthcare, etc., etc.
Yeah, absolutely.
So part of our role is actually just making sure that we're a bit more precise about what modern medicine can achieve, and a lot of it, unfortunately, that misperception is driven by advertising. Yeah. It's about like in America, for example, there's a huge amount of advertising from the drug industry, promising all sorts of magic pills for people. So really, this is at the heart of the problem, isn't it? It's really a kind of a misinformation because of the system, and therefore people are not making informed choices. So we have to think about how do we improve that system, Steve, where people can have, I'm all for free enterprise and people having, making money and being entrepreneurial, etc. But, it's better that they make that money from giving people the full information, not hiding facts that ultimately could change their decision completely.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, two things I'd like to pick up on there. And one, you're right, seatbelts, car accidents, workplace accidents. We had Eric Edemedes, I hope I pronounced that right, on recently, who talked brilliantly about, in one sense, we've never been this safe. There isn't so much danger. Okay, you hear about the occasional, terrible thing that goes wrong, but overall, as human beings, as a species, we've never been as safe in human history as we are today. Put that on top then of appropriate medication and all the good stuff like the vaccinations and so on. So we're safer, we've got a great NHS, we've got some really good medicine. So in theory, our life expectancy should be going up at the moment as we study things and learn things. But overall, a male adult today has a shorter life expectancy than a male adult in the 1870s. So something fundamentally is going wrong.
We should be living to 120, Steve.
I think so. Yeah.
So some estimates suggest that if we had environments that were conducive to healthy living in the modern day, we should all be living to about 120.
Yeah. Imagine if you put, absolutely. Imagine putting our NHS into some of those blue zones around the world. So Icaria, the little island off Turkey, it's a Greek island, but just off Turkey.
There won't be any work, Steve. There'll be no work for people. There won't be any work for any of the staff.
But there's something there to fall back on if you needed it. But yeah, there are people living, into their hundreds and 20s around the world, and it's because they're living more primarily. They're living, a more natural life. So that's one thing I wanted to put on just a thought there. But I remember an article, TV program you were on years ago. And again, we believe there are some really good drugs. But you said one of the problems is, biased research, pamphlets that are just wrong, marketing that's wrong, advertising. And I think it was you that said, the vast majority of advertising revenue, marketing revenue from big pharma goes to doctors to try and, get them to prescribe the drug. So we know that medicine is good, but we also know medicine can be one of the number one reasons people go into hospital for too much medication or over medication.
Yeah.
How do we change all this? How do we get to say, look, come on, Mr. Prime Minister, come on, Matt Hancock, we could, with this brilliant NHS, be all living longer, and we know you get revenue from all the big food companies and the big pharmaceutical companies, but come on, where do we start to change? Do we start by trying to get the Eat Well guidelines just squashed? Do we start by saying, well, let's rethink medical education for doctors? Where do you think the starting point is?
I think we're talking really, Steve, about a complete revolution, aren't we, of healthcare, dietary guidelines, etc. And for that revolution to happen, we need to really make what is a gross injustice being inflicted on human beings, on humanity, visible. Mm-hmm. That's what needs to be done, and then influence as many people as possible, and therefore change, ultimately the public will influence and decide what politicians do.
Yeah.
But the public are getting information from very biased sources most of the time, and they believe it. So what we need to do is go to the very top end and make sure, you mentioned dietary guidelines, we need to make sure that they're independent. There needs to be no perception of conflicts of interest as well. There's one of the things that really concerns me, Steve, and, maybe it's a topic for another time, but there's been a lot of this discussion about the anti-vax movement. There's been one survey, I think, suggesting, if I'm not wrong, that a significant portion of people, 1/3 to maybe half of people, are going to potentially refuse a vaccine that becomes available for COVID-19, which is very disturbing. But rather than attack those individuals, you've got to ask yourself, why are those people, falling for a lot of this stuff around the harms and all these links with vaccines and all the harms that they do? It's because there's a lack of trust in government, in information people are getting, people are becoming more and more aware of it. So it's our job and our duty to try and make sure that we highlight and understand why these problems are there, rather than just demonizing and telling people that that their kids can't go to school, or threatening them with legal action. We need to understand why this is happening. Such a huge proportion of people. So really, what we need to do is make sure that the system is completely transparent. Certainly, when it comes to medical education, when it comes to dietary guidelines, when it comes to pharmaceutical drugs, and that isn't there at the moment. And I think one of the reasons we haven't changed the system is lack of knowledge of these system failures.
Yeah.
So, I'm a true Democrat, Steve. I believe in informed choice. I believe in real democracy. But unfortunately, we don't really live in a real democracy at the moment, because people are making decisions on biased information. So how do we address that, and we get to the roots of it, is by making sure that, all of us have a role to play, to ask the right questions, and to hold those people who, ultimately have the influence over medical guidelines and dietary guidelines, hold them accountable, that the information that they are providing, that they're giving to the public, is completely independent, and is up to date with the scientific evidence.
Yeah.
And that isn't, unfortunately, what the way we're living at the moment, the way that we're receiving information. That just doesn't exist. I mean, it's and that, as I highlight in my talks, that in many ways explains why we've got this healthcare system failure.
Yeah.
Because if, as you said correctly, we've got all these brilliant minds around the world. We've advanced technology and with so-called advances in modern medicine and science. If we were doing it all right, and if we were doing it legitimately and honestly and with integrity, we wouldn't have this mess that we're in around the world, Steve, right now.
Agreed.
We wouldn't have it.
Well, I think you GPs all do, and GPs do it with integrity. It's just that lack of knowledge. We've got loads of questions coming in. Before we go to them, let me rephrase it. It was a great answer, by the way, but let me rephrase it another way. Dr. Aseem Malhotra, who's been right in the centre of the whole debate about, and probably one of the pioneers of metabolic syndrome, how cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's, obesity, all of these, heart disease, stroke, can all be linked to metabolic syndrome, which is all, to a certain extent related to the wrong food choices. Put that one side. So you're there. You've got this knowledge now, and it's 2020. But you go back 54 years to the year I was born, when we were all 2.5 stone lighter. And I can't remember who was the Prime Minister when I was born, but you go back to the Prime Minister in your time machine, and you knock on his door, and you go, 50 years from now, everybody's going to be 16 kg, 2.5 stone heavier. We're all going to have these all these diseases that are just starting to come up now, heart disease, cancer, It's going to be so widespread you won't believe it. Here's what you should do. What would that, just give me that one, here's what you should do. You've just gone back 50 years.
Well, I think you were referring to the low-fat food movement, really.
Maybe, yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I would, if I was there at the time, I would look at the evidence behind that, those guidelines. To be honest, I think at the time they were implemented with the right intentions, and that was to curb heart disease. You've got to remember that in 1960, 1970, we peaked from 1920 onwards. There was a huge increase in cardiovascular death rates and the prevalence of heart disease in the UK and the USA, and scientists at the time were trying to understand why. That was well before we really fully understood the impact of how damaging smoking was. And it was postulated by scientist Ansel Keys that saturated fat in the diet was the link, because of the links between high cholesterol levels and death rates from heart disease, which we now know is actually only really relevant to people with very, very high cholesterol levels, and probably most important, people who have a genetic condition that affects 1 in 200 people. So you throw all of that in there, but the intentions were correct. They were pure intentions in my view. And then the dietary guidelines changed to follow a kind of, reduce fat, etc. But actually it wasn't that you should eat lots of pasta and starch and that kind of stuff. It was, a whole food diet with lots of vegetables and fruit, which actually, if you followed that, and even if it was low fat, probably wouldn't have done harm. The issue is that industry came in and they started marketing and taking advantage that, fat was to be feared, fat will kill you, it'll cause heart disease, raise your cholesterol, and therefore then benefited from mass producing lots of so-called health foods with low-fat foods. And then that dominated a lot of the food supply, because then cheap sugar, cheap refined carbohydrates became, the predominant calorie or whatever, that increased in terms of its consumption. And then overall the food environment, and we're eating a lot more, a lot of snack foods. When you combine all that together, you then produce this tsunami of metabolic disease. So I think that's probably a more reasonable, accurate, analysis of what happened.
I think
I don't know, Steve. I really don't know what would have done, because I don't think we could have predicted what was going to happen with ultra processed food.
No, but you've gone back in your time machine. You know what's coming. You've gone back in your time machine.
Okay.
And you went back in your time machine. So I think you're saying, don't fear real, natural, wholesome fat, as long as it's real.
No, absolutely. And in fact, actually going back, even for people with even though type 2 diabetes and obesity wasn't prevalent, there were still cases of it. It was still there in society. And the people that seemed to have the best effect, or certainly one approach, was cutting out the starch and the sugars. So that has been there for a very long time. But yes, I would have focused on making sure sugar was, the consumption of sugar was very low, and any real whole foods, absolutely.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Should we go and answer some questions? By the way, the last couple of weeks we've had so many amazing stories. Your inspiration, last time you were on, you can change your life in 21 days. We've had dozens of people that during the last, we're on show 43 now, have changed their diet and lost so much weight, feel healthy, come off certain medications, and so brilliant.
Yeah, on that note, Steve, as well, it was published in the Telegraph newspaper. There's a former member of the European Parliament, Alexander Phillips, and she's a friend of mine. In fact, she was involved in helping, in getting me to speak at the European Parliament a few years ago. She put her mum essentially on the Piopi diet, who has high blood pressure, and she's basically come off her blood pressure pills in about 4 to 5 weeks, lost 5-6 kilograms.
Brilliant.
And is now being told by the GP that she can stop her BP pills.
Wow.
So, this stuff does work, as you know.
That absolutely does work. Hi, Steve. I'm having zoodles on the menu tonight. That's probably the same as what we were talking about. She's great. She says, good morning, Dr. Aseem. You're great. So happy that you've been featured on the front page of the Telegraph. Marvelous said, I saw that program from India. Thank you so much for spreading the word about the food bank shows. That's from our team. Kirsty says, you're an inspiration, Aseem. You've got a fan club here this morning, mate. Can nutrition replace medication for secondary CVD prevention? Are you or is anyone conducting any trials into this, says Neil?
Really good question. So I think rather than say in a binary, can it replace, what was it? Was it statins he asked specifically? Was it?
No, didn't mention statins.
Medication.
Yeah, so can nutrition replace medication for secondary CVD prevention? Or is anybody conducting trials?
Well, I think what I would ask him to do is to read an article I wrote with the former chair of the Medical Royal College's Sue Bailey, which is open access, called Ignorance is Not Bliss. It's time to introduce lifestyle changes, to manage heart disease. And that actually talks about a case study of a patient of mine, Tony Royal, who came to see me several years ago having had a heart attack. This is all in public knowledge, so this is not confidential information. He's very happy for me to share this. And essentially, he, previous international airline pilot with Virgin Atlantic, suffered a heart attack in his early 50s, then was put on a cocktail of medications. He was always very active, but followed the kind of low-fat, high-carbohydrate diet kind of thing, and put on weight. And then he thought he didn't feel it was getting better. He started to get side effects from medication. He stopped his statin and got better. And then he wanted an informed discussion about all was taking and whether he could do it through lifestyle. And I gave him, I talked him through it, and that's mentioned in the article about what the individual benefit of all the drugs were and what my advice would be. But then he made an informed decision himself that he wanted to stop all his medications, and he did so after about a year and a bit. So there's definitely, 2 medications that people have had heart attacks or, had stents that they absolutely should not stop unless there's a major complication. Those are aspirin and another blood thinner, especially after a stent, for at least a year. So I'm not advising people to stop their medications. It's really important you have a discussion with your doctor about this. But what's important that people should know why they're taking the pill, what the benefit is, and what are the alternatives if they decide that for whatever reason, personal preference, they don't want to take any medications, which is what Tony Rawl did. And he transformed his lifestyle. I mean, he's running ultra marathons. He's not on any meds. He's had a stent. He's had a heart attack, and he's doing really, really well. And that's obviously one isolated case. But it just highlights the point. It's about informed decision making ultimately, Steve. Just diet can reduce death rates and heart attacks. The only benefit really that we've seen is one clinical trial in secondary prevention called the Leon Heart Trial, which looked at putting heart attack patients on the Mediterranean diet, and they did have a massive reduction in death rates and heart attacks. In fact, if you compare that one trial to all the trials on statins in secondary prevention, it was more powerful than statins, significantly more so. But obviously, limitations of that is one trial; it needs to be replicated, etc. And that's something I'm working on. So, in theory, yes. However, with the data we have at the moment, all these medications do have a role to play, but it's a very small amount that they have in preventing further heart attacks and death for individuals. And you can't just ultimately say, it's kind of slightly comparing apples and oranges. What I would say is, make your own informed decision with a discussion with your doctor. But in addition, instead of in the first instance, in addition, you're going to be much healthier if you do the lifestyle changes as well.
Yeah, that's great advice. And of course,
the problem is, Steve, as you know, a lot of patients, they go home and they're told low-fat diet, very vague, kind of do a bit of exercise, lose a bit of weight, blah, blah, blah. And a lot of them don't really necessarily follow it, or they think that medicines is all they need. And many people have the illusion of protection. We know that, for example, people, who are on statins, a very good study showed that people on statins in primary prevention, ended up much heavier over a 10-year period than people that didn't take statins, who had the same baseline risk. Mm-hmm. And it's thought that the illusion of protection, people think, I'm on a statin, I can eat what I like.
Yeah.
That's a problem. So in theory, you could be doing more harm to a patient on the information you give them if they're led to believe that now they're taking a statin, they can eat what they like.
Yeah. That's great advice, isn't it? I like what you said there, secondary prevention, take your meds while you make those lifestyle choices. And then after you've made those lifestyle choices, sit with your GP and then see if you can start deprescribing.
Absolutely.
But I'll also like to pick up on the question there, though, Neil, about clinical trials. It's unlikely we're going to get any big, significant clinical trials about medication versus lifestyle, because the clinical trials are funded by the pharmaceutical. You'll see loads of pharmaceutical trials trying to prove the drugs work, but who on earth is going to fund the £200,000, £300,000 trial to say lifestyle over medication? The funding just won't be available, I wouldn't have thought.
I'm working on it, mate. Don't worry. We'll get it done soon.
Good man. That's the answer I was hoping.
From independent sources, it has to be right, though.
Yeah.
Bias funding is a problem, so it has to be an independent source, ideally from government. So I'm working on something on that, but other researchers hopefully doing the same. And I think people demand it and they want it, and we need those trials. But in the meantime, as we've already alluded to, those risk factors, we've got enough evidence to show that, you change your lifestyle now, you're going to be in a better place in terms of risk factors within a few weeks and without side effects, and you're going to feel healthier too. So in my view, it's a win-win. It's a no-brainer.
The mail intimating that, what's this word? I'm dyslexic. CROZ and cheese contributed Boris's weight. No mention of his like of pizza. That's just a comment. I tell you what, I didn't see.
What's okay? Sorry. Yeah, what was it? Cheese.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends what he was eating the cheese with. If he was eating it on a pizza, if he was eating it in a burger, it probably wasn't the cheese as such. I mean, all these things contribute, as you know, Steve. But I think cheese alone is probably not the biggest problem that Boris has faced for weight gain. I can't comment without looking at his dietary pattern, but from what I understand, I think it's and from what I know from insiders, without naming anyone. I think a lot of it is just the same as everybody else. It's a lot of the snack and junk foods are the big problem for Boris, that have been a big problem for Boris.
I mean, your good friend Tom Watson, who downsized from being very obese to, I would say a normal weight, ex-deputy leader of the Labour Party, lost a lot of his weight from following your diet. But when you speak to Tom, he said one of the problems for MPs and those down at the Houses of Parliament is that you're so busy, you just do end up eating crap food all the time because that's pretty much all that's available.
No, you're right. It's availability. It's the same in hospitals, Steve, isn't it, as well?
Yeah.
So we've got this big problem with the NHS workforce being overweight or obese as well. And this isn't, again, pointing fingers at people. It's just to highlight that everyone's affected, even people in healthcare who work in healthcare, who should be working in environments that promote good health, but 75% of the food purchased in hospitals is unhealthy.
Yeah.
So until you sort that environmental problem out, you're not going to be able to help individuals. And even if you do help individuals and, you train people and condition them to try and avoid these environmental triggers, it's hard. It's hard for them. And how long will it last for? You can exert willpower for so long, but if the environment is, it's like the analogy I've given before, it's like asking a child that grows up in a sweet shop to not eat sweets.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's just impossible. I've put on a bit of weight being in lockdown because we do have some rubbish in the house, and I've been tempted a few times. Steve,
and I think Steve also, the other thing, as you probably know as well, I think that we all are more likely to seek these sorts of sugary treats out when we're stressed as well. And a lot of people, understandably right now, are under a lot of stress, even being at home and under fear of death, basically, from a deadly virus. So, it's understandable why people are going to be reaching for these foods. But we have to just think of creative ways and better ways to, for people to, not be sort of tempted into eating these foods, or just really remove them from the food environment. But obviously right now it's impossible to do, but the government needs to work on it so that over the next few years we make the default choice a healthy choice, and then it becomes easier for people. In fact, then probably it's all intertwined, as their stress levels will reduce, their weight will get better, they'll feel better. If they're feeling better mentally and physically, they're less likely to reach for these foods. And that's what I did myself. I used to eat junk, absolute junk, for a lot of my medical career as a junior doctor, working on night shifts, etc. It was very typical for me. I'd start an A&E shift or a medical registrar shift at 9-10 p.m. Really busy, loads of patients to get through and see, who've been admitted, and you've got to manage them. And then you get a break, maybe around 2:30, 3 in the morning, and you start to breathe. I'd love a packet of crisps right now, or a chocolate bar. Yeah. And that's what I do. Consistently. Absolutely. That was my routine for many years. Go to the vending machine, get a twirl, get a packet of crisps, get an instant kind of endorphin, dopamine high from that to deal with my stress levels, and then go back. And that was just a cycle. And then once I'd realized how damaging it was, and interestingly, I wouldn't sleep as well, and I'd maybe have a bit of a bloated tummy and all that kind of stuff. And I started reading the science and thinking about, God, I really need to sort my health out, longer term as well. I converted those sweet treats, and very effectively, but I had to be proactive about it. Is I wouldn't have a sugary drink or a juice or whatever. I'd have a bottle of water. I'd take a bottle of water in with me on the night shift, and I would have a piece of fruit and apple. And therefore, when I got to 2 or 3 in the morning, I would just have the apple and a bottle of water, and I would be sorted. That was it. Easy.
Well done, my friend. Now, we have, where's the comment gone? A brilliant comment just come in from a Steve Oliver, who I don't know, but I love what he's saying here. Please, can we replace the word fat with metabolic syndrome, as obesity is a marker and fat is good? He's absolutely right. If we keep saying the word, you've got to reduce your body fat, and then you're trying to explain that actually fat is good when you eat it, as long as it's real fat and it's actually, too much sugar and carbs that's the problem. Maybe we need to drop the word fat from our sort of way of speaking when we're talking about the excess weight on the body, because we're trying to promote people eating real fat. How can Dr. Aseem Malhotra, who I know promotes people having lots of olive oil, which is a fat, and then we say, Boris, you're fat. We've got to try and find a new language of things. Either we've got to change
I agree. And in fact, if you pick up the Sunday Express tomorrow, there should be an article from me addressing this very specific issue.
Oh, really?
But yes, I agree with you, Steve. We need to talk about, I think we need to shift the discussion. I think we have to think about how we shift that messaging. But I think optimal metabolic health is probably the best way, because you see, then we cover everybody. It's not just about, just targeting, or I understand, people are very sensitive about weight issues. People are concerned that this is being exploited into a personal responsibility, and understandably concerned personal responsibility about pointing fingers, calling people, gluttons and being lazy and stuff like that. And unfortunately, a lot of that stuff comes from the food industry. So they deflect their blame from the foods they market, and they misinform people with stuff and get them addicted to all these ultra processed foods. Say this is a personal response. It's not our fault. It's your fault because you're lazy and you eat too much, which is, we know, is complete nonsense. So we need to shift that messaging away from that. And I think actually you're right. Let's talk about optimal metabolic health, which affects two-thirds of people who have normal BMI do not have optimal metabolic health, and it increases if you're overweight and obese. So I think that's the message. I agree completely. I think that's a really good point. And at the moment, it's about shifting it in a way that still resonates with people. I think rather than talking about eating fat or being fat, I think we just talk about excess body fat. I think that also, because people want an explanation. What do you mean optimal metabolic health? So you explain that, which is what I did on the news yesterday, but say this is about excess body fat. Basically, the damaging fat is the one that's in your abdomen. The visceral fat and even subcutaneous fat as well can be damaging too. So I think we need to just focus on abdominal fat, excess body fat really as the issue. And of course, there are different drivers of that, of course, from diet. So
great comment there, Steve. Read the paper tomorrow, but great comment. Right, loads of questions coming on. I'm going to fire them over to you. So question for yourself from MG, which I think is Manoj Goyal in Jaipur in India. What will be your advice for hypothyroid patients who have had their gallbladder removed and are advised to eat small meals throughout the day?
Steve, to be honest, I couldn't comment on that very specific individual case. I would suggest to that person really, who's advised them, first of all, where they got that advice from, what's it based upon, just to really ask those questions. I wouldn't be able to give advice specifically on that.
Fully understand. Tom Bennett, not my Tom Bennett, but a different one, says, if I have had COVID with a terrible chest infection while on a keto diet, would I expect my LDL and triglycerides to go really high? I've been keto/carnivore for 5 months. The infection was in Feb.
Again, I don't see any reason why it should. There are a few people that have hyper-responders that have LDL that goes up significantly. We don't think that is particularly harmful as far as we're aware, because all the other metabolic markers get better on a ketogenic diet. But I'm not aware of any relationship between chest infection and increasing triglycerides and LDL.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I know so many people, this is from Tom again, I know so many people who are toffee without knowing it. For those who don't know, toffee is thin on the outside, fat on the inside. They see themselves as thin, so blindly consume all sorts of concealed and not so concealed sugar products and oils. Good point.
Yeah, no, sure. And that's why I think we need to address metabolic health for everybody. Yeah. If people are not sure about how you can check for that in terms of waist circumference, so if you're a man, you want your waist circumference to be less than 102 centimeters if you're a man, and less than 88 if you're a woman. If you're of South Asian origin, if you're Indian, Chinese, etc., then it's much lower. You want your waist circumference to be less than 90 centimeters for a man and 85 centimeters if you're a female. And that's best measured just above the umbilicus. So get a tape measure. Another good rule of thumb is you want your total waist circumference to be less than half of your height. Mm-hmm. And that's also a very good, nice, kind of slightly crude but useful measure, much better than body mass index to help as a marker of your metabolic health.
That's brilliant. Thanks, mate. If you have a fully blocked artery on the right side of my neck, I've lost a lot of weight on 2 meals a day, low carb, everyone. Trek, I don't quite get that one, but if you have a fully blocked artery on the right side of my neck, I've lost lots of weight on 2 meals a day. Don't know if that's a question or whether you can pick up on that.
I have no idea.
No, mate. Here's a great one. If diabetes can be reversed, yes it can high blood pressure be reversed with the correct diet?
Yeah, several of my patients have sorted their blood pressure out by going on POP. within a few weeks to a few months. The reason for that is about 50% of high blood pressure is because of insulin resistance. So this is again excess body fat and the types of foods people are eating. And when they cut those out, then that blood pressure can drop. Now it's going to vary from person to person. For many people, they can potentially come off pills, but if not that, at least they can reduce the need for medications and reduce the doses, which a lot of patients are happy with. So absolutely doable. And in terms of salt, I've been evolving my thinking around salt. I think the data suggests probably that there are a significant portion of people with high blood pressure who are salt sensitive, probably about 10%. And some patients, interestingly, who I've seen recently, even one man who I had a discussion with recently, a patient who's on a carnivore diet and had loads of benefits from him metabolically being on a carnivore diet, essentially just eating meat all the time, and cutting out all the refined carbs, obviously, when you're on that diet, improved his metabolic health, but then his blood pressure started creeping up. And the only thing he did, and he was, very obsessive and meticulous about everything he was eating, is he reduced the salt intake, and his blood pressure got significantly better. So I know there's a lot of debate and controversy around salt, but it's likely that there are a proportion of patients, not everybody, with high blood pressure that are salt sensitive and will improve their blood pressure from reducing salt. So I think it's something, if people are out there, it's something they can always try, and you'll notice the benefits within a few weeks anyway.
Yeah. So salt for many, and I remember reading James Antonio's book about the salt fix. For many people, salt isn't the issue, but for some people, salt can still be an issue, is what we're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Cool. Everyone tells me low carb is bad, or OMAD, which is 1 meal a day. What's your advice? Thank you. Keep going with the information. So Edith is saying people are telling her that low carbs is bad, and Steve Bennett, who always promotes 1 meal a day, is probably a lunatic. What's your advice on low carb and OMAD? I mean, I know we can spend hours talking
I think you've got to do what works for you, but conceptually, nothing is really that in that sense bad if it's helping your metabolic health and whatever approach that you choose to follow. The science will evolve about longer term. We don't know a lot about the longer term. The truth is about longer term impacts of these different dietary approaches. But what I would say is that, what is, when we talk about low carb, we need to be very specific. We're talking about predominantly reducing the refined carbohydrates, the high glycemic index, high glycemic load carbs. These are essentially carbohydrates that lack fiber. So this isn't about whole fruit and vegetables for most people. This is about too much bread and too much pasta, too much sugar in the diet, ultra processed foods. So if you follow the diet that I advocate for, and I'm always opening to refining and changing my views as the new evidence comes in, is one which is essentially a Mediterranean diet, but cuts out, the sugar and the starch for people with type 2 and metabolic syndrome. If you are metabolically healthy, if you're one of the fortunate few, 1 in 8 people, adults, who's metabolically healthy, you can absolutely probably get away with some starch in there. But you should at least make sure you're getting a wide variety of lots of low sugar fruit and lots of vegetables from good sources in your diet.
Yeah.
And of course, on top of that, yes, then there's nothing to worry about in terms of things like having red meat every so often, and oily fish, of course, really important, and nuts, etc. That would really be a low carb diet. And that definition is varies, but a lot of the studies show people, they talk about people being low carb if they're having less than 40% of their calories from carbohydrates. But actually, a lot of the die-hard sort of low carbers who've benefited feel that, especially type 2 diabetics, felt that they needed to cut their total carbohydrate consumption less than 20%, less than even 10%, in many cases, to really see those benefits. So I think it depends where you're starting from. But no, in general, low carb as a term is not bad. But it also depends on what are you eating. What does low carb mean for you? And are you getting all the nutrients that you need from all the different foods that you can eat?
That's great advice. And we keep saying, remember, we're not saying, I've never said no carb. I always say low carb, because as far as I'm concerned, if you take, say, the cruciferous family of vegetables, so your cauliflowers, your broccoli, and all of them, your kale and your spinach, and take all these, as far as I'm concerned, you can eat as much of that as you want as long as it's organic. It is nutrient dense.
Yeah.
And even though it has got carbs
and I think the other thing as well that's important to emphasize, and this isn't really about weight, it's just about, it's about performance and all that kind of stuff. For me personally, Steve, a little bit of those sort of, I wouldn't say lots of starch, but for example, I have porridge in the morning, sugar-free porridge oats, small amounts in the morning with mixed berries and some dark chocolate in there, etc. I find that for my workouts, and I'm quite active, that does me, I just feel better. I just feel, more energized. I'm not over consuming it, but it gives me what I need personally to be able to enjoy my workout and lift weights, etc.
Yeah.
So, it depends where you're starting off from and what works for you.
And we're all different, aren't we? I mean, I nobody believes me, but I can weight train better without any food. I'm much more sluggish if I have breakfast. Now, Steve, who gave us that great question earlier on, has just come back with a great one. I think this is some ammunition for you as you talk to the government. Ready? So Steve says, if all GP surgeries operated as David Unwin's surgery does, the potential saving to the NHS is calculated at 266 million per year. If government need an incentive, then they should be able to relate to this. And for those who don't know, Dr. David Unwin, in his surgery, because he's trying to make lifestyle changes with his patients, he sent back, because he's deprescribing many drugs, obviously only when it's safe for the patients and only when they make the lifestyle changes. But he sent back a cheque for £47,000 a year or so ago because he wasn't spending as much on drugs. And Steve Oliver says, if you want to just give them those maths, that might help the case.
Yeah, well, we've already actually, they're aware of that. So several years ago, I coordinated a kind of joint campaign between the National Obesity Forum and the Public Health Collaboration, and produced a report. We produced a report with lots of international people who put their name to it, including people like Jason Fung and Robert Lustig. Basically, it was called Stop Snacking, Eat Fat, Cut the Carbs to Reverse Type 2 Diabetes and Obesity. And it became a massive, huge news story here. I mean, I was on Good Morning Britain. It was all over the news. And in that, we did very specifically reference the work of David Unwin, his pioneering work in general practice on this. So it is there, But one of the things that I've learned, Steve, in all of this is that, when you're trying to change the system, even one day's news isn't enough. If you're really going to make things, it has to be a sustained, dedicated campaign. It needs to be repeated. You've got to think about this. Think about advertising. You're constantly, almost on a daily basis around the world, people are inundated with messages through advertising. Yeah. What is that going to be against one day's news where we say, actually, you shouldn't eat sugar? It has to be dedicated, sustained. It needs, all that kind of stuff, and involve the media. That's the challenge we have. It's not easy. It really isn't easy. But that's what we need to do.
That's such a great way of looking at it, isn't it? If you took the daily budget of McDonald's, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, all these big companies that are peddling sugar and high carbohydrate meals, they're doing it day in, day out. And also they're lobbying at the same time government. So it is an ongoing battle for sure. Andrew Hunt, who, by the way, Andrew, yes, my webinar was great yesterday, thank you. Andrew says, I was on medication to address the side effects of other medication, madness. And I feel for you, Andrew. I know Andrew was ex-military, and my dad's the same. My dad's on 10. He knows what 2 of them do, and he thinks the other 8 are something to do with the side effects of the other 2, but he's not quite sure. We are in that situation.
Yeah, I mean, again, GPs by and large are, they do a fantastic job. I grew up in a GP household, Steve. Both my parents, are GPs. My dad's been both of them dedicated GPs to the NHS for well over 25 years. So I completely understand, this chap's concerns. Speak to a GP. They are very familiar and aware of medication. You've got to just be assertive about how you feel. Yeah. And whether this is an issue, and if you highlight it to your GP, I'm sure they will help try and work out whether this, you're getting a side, if it's to deal with the side effect of a medication, ask the GP, why do you need that medication? What is the absolute benefit for you? You deserve to know that, because you got to remember, most drugs do not work in most patients in terms of benefit.
Yeah.
Let me repeat that. Most drugs for most patients do not benefit patients.
That's fine.
So you've got to find out what is your individual benefit. Is it 1 in 100? Is it 1 in 50? Is it 1 in 200? and you deserve to know that. And you need to ask your doctor, and then you need to make an informed decision. What are the side effects, etc., about whether you need that medication or not. So that's your right as a patient.
Yeah, I think it's frightening, isn't it? Not after a heart attack, but if you haven't had a heart attack yet and you get put on statins, the numbers to get a benefit, something like 300 people need to take a statin for one person to get a benefit.
That's if you completely believe the industry-sponsored data, which that information is derived from.
Yeah. So it might even be zero. So the thing is, go to your doctor.
I'm not saying that. I didn't say that.
No, you didn't. I know you didn't. So go to your doctor and say, I'm on all this medication. If I commit to making lifestyle changes, what can we first look at deprescribing? Is that a good conversation if you're on a lot of medication?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, doctors are aware of polypharmacy. We call it polypharmacy if you're on lots of medications that, can contribute to side effects. It is a big problem. It's in particular for the elderly. As you get older, you're more vulnerable to side effects from medications. So, in the over 65s, for example, up to a quarter of all hospital admissions are because of dangerous drug interactions, if you like. So it's a big problem. It's a big issue. And one estimate suggests that the third biggest cause of death after heart disease and cancer are side effects from prescribed medications globally. Wow. Now, it may not be number 3, it may be a bit low, but it's still a big factor. Yeah. So I think have that mindset and understanding. And then, if everybody's aware of it, Steve, then less people will be harmed.
What would it take for doctors? No, it needs the education first for doctors. Because I was going to say, let's, with your publisher and my book, why don't we give, first you come in with something, well, why don't you go and read that book, and then come back in a week's time, and then, if you still want medication, I'm talking nonsense. Kirsty says, here we go. I've just finished reading Fat and Furious, which is my latest book, and I'm thin and furious as opposed to fat and furious. I suffered from acne, joint pain, low mood, low energy, and I'm not even 30 years old. Since living primarily, they've all disappeared. Isn't that amazing? And it doesn't matter whether it's primal or poppy, we all have pretty much the same message of, eat sort of a Mediterranean, sort of natural, organic meal. So well done. That's brilliant, Kirsty. Would it work better if we have an independent group that advises the government, because the government and MPs, health minister, etc., change regularly? Oh, what a good point.
Yes. Those groups are there. But they're not independent. That's the problem. The concerns are they're not independent. The Eat Well Guide, Zoe Harcombe highlighted in British Sports Medicine that many members of the people that made up the latest Eat Well Guide, so-called ideal healthy eating plan plate for the NHS and for the country. Several of those members, I think 6 out of the 15 or 14, were members of companies such as Coca-Cola, Kellogg's, McDonald's, and those are obviously companies well known who market and profit from, selling foods that are essentially the big problem, big issue in terms of ultra processing, etc. So that unfortunately has influenced those guidelines, which are therefore, in my view, absolutely not independent.
Yeah.
And that what we need really is to make sure that the guidance reflects the best available independent science and is made up by scientists who have no vested interest for either personal, financial, but often more importantly, institutional ties to those companies. And often that isn't declared in, even discussions that go on TV. And I often having to debate, having discussions with various journalists or whatever. And people sometimes get confused because another doctor or professor has given a very different view or said something completely opposite. Yeah. And, it's not to say what they're saying is wrong, but one of the reasons why they've given a different view, which isn't fully declared in that discussion, is that, they may be getting, I'm just giving you some examples. I've got lots of examples. I won't obviously name anybody, but
I'll give you one.
Their university.
Yeah. I'll give you one, Aseem, that's
all of their research has been funded by Coca-Cola.
Yeah. I'll give you
funded by Coca-Cola or a particular drug company or whatever. So that introduces a bias And that's a big problem. So I think when it comes to, it doesn't mean that scientists, industry has a role to play, of course. But when it comes to independent guidelines and what we should be doing, that needs to be completely dissociated from those scientists.
Yeah. I went for my medical. I go for an annual medical every year. And last year I went. And Dr. Kellerman, who's a brilliant doctor, I've had the same doctor for 20 years, doing my Keyman Insurance medical. And she said, your LDL is too high. We may, but unless you can sort it out, we've got to put you on statins. And she said, and if anything, the level now that is advised has just come down. And I went, well, yeah, I know about that. And luckily, the week before, I'd been talking to Malcolm Kendrick. And every time they drop the acceptable level of LDL, it makes billions for the pharmaceutical industry. Well, apparently, on that last panel in America deciding whether they should drop down the acceptable level of LDL, while the chairman was independent completely, the 8 people on the panel had 91 conflicts of interest across them. In other words, they were all multiple times associated with the statin industry. It's frightening.
So I think it's, obviously it's good that these are declared, but declaration doesn't remove the bias. In fact, one study showed that somebody who was giving a talk who mentioned their declaration of conflict of interest at the beginning of the talk, although the audience initially thought that the credibility of the speaker was reduced slightly, when they kind of surveyed it and researched it, they found that what would happen is it gave the speaker a moral license to exaggerate their claims even further, and therefore ultimately didn't make a difference in terms of what was being said. So declarations are important, they're good, people should be aware of it, but it doesn't unfortunately remove the bias. And that's a big discussion, an area which isn't highlighted enough, because they think, oh, it's fine, I've declared that I've got these interests, where my interests are, if I'm getting money from so-and-so. And that, it seems to be the end of it, but that isn't, unfortunately. There's still a huge bias there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Andrew said it takes a long time to turn a big ship around. You're right, Andrew, but I'm with Aseem. I think we just got to keep this battle going and going. Adi says, thank you for reading both my questions. Daniel said, I managed through food to get my father's blood pressure down to normal after years of high blood pressure. Well, thank you everybody for putting your questions in today. Aseem, thank you for taking the time, mate. You're an absolute inspiration to us all, and let's just keep this battle going.
Absolutely, mate. It's a team effort, so I'm happy to be part of that team, and let's just carry on the mission to make as many people as possible healthier and happier. Yeah,
absolutely. One idea came out the other day from Jerome, who's a brilliant author and journalist, and also from Patrick Holford, that in America, the Senate have been holding these open TV debates where doctors can disagree with each other, but it's all open for everybody to listen in, and all televised. If at some point we can find a way of televising, and if we can't get it on television, certainly on the internet, but it needs millions of people watching, but yourself, Patrick Holford, a few others, and let's just get a debate going. Let's get somebody from Kellogg's on, let's get somebody from a statin company on, and let's get Malcolm Kendrick on, and let's have an open debate, and then I think the education will come flooding out.
Yeah, I think that's a really good idea, Steve, but what I would say is that this would only be effective if you've got tens of millions of people watching it around the world. Yeah. To be honest.
Yeah. No, agreed.
But I'm all for it. I think you just got to think about, we've got to maximize the impact of it, of course. And I can say this from the perspective that I spoke in the European Parliament a couple of years ago, and it was live streamed by Diet Doctor. Ivor Cummins was there, Andreas Enfeldt. And I think at one stage at the beginning they had 50,000. That's great. It helps spread the message 100%. Anything you can do. But I think learning from that experience, I was like, well, how do we get 1 million people, as you said? Yeah. How do we ensure that we've got 1 million people who are going to tune in? Yeah. And I think that's crucial. That's important. That will change things. Well, and of course, a lot of people, at the end of the day, to be honest, even influencing one person to improve their health and their lifestyle is an amazing thing. But I think when it talks about policy changes, people are then going to get information from us in our discussion, and then they're going to say, well, hold on a minute, this isn't what the British Dietetic Association say, this isn't what the British Heart Foundation say, we're now confused, who do we believe? So really the policy makers, those people at the very top, even if one of those people sees it and then changes policy, even if that was the only one person watching it, that would be massive. Yeah. And when I wrote the Pioppi diet, I said, I'm not really that bothered about how many copies it sells. I'm more bothered about the fact it changes policy. And, I think Tom Watson's story may be the most impactful in that, because very senior politician, and also probably hopefully going to influence Boris Johnson now, who massively benefited from going low carb.
Yeah.
And as far as I'm concerned, for me, that I'd done my bit. I was happy with that. That Tom Watson, if nobody else had read the book, and Tom Watson's read it, and then he's influenced policy, and no one's even heard of the book, that doesn't matter. We've made a difference.
Well, you definitely are making a difference, my friends. So just keep up that great work. Go and get yourself some sleep, and we'll catch up in coming weeks.
All right, mate. Take care. Thanks a lot.
Cheers. Aseem. That was the brilliant Dr. Aseem Malhotra. I hope you really enjoyed today's show. We're coming to the end of this little series, but what I've been talking to a lot of the guests about is that the Fat and Furious podcast, which are currently 1 a week, maybe we can increase the frequency maybe soon to maybe 2 a week. My team have also committed at Primal Living to putting at least 1 or 2 new recipes up on YouTube every week. So why not subscribe right now to the channel? Set the little notification bell so you know when we post new videos. Also maybe go and have a look at Primal Living over on Facebook, where we keep regularly updating you, and also on Instagram, our brilliant Hannah, who does all our recipes. Basically, I set the guidelines of what should be in the recipe, but she goes away and makes some beautiful, crafts some great recipes, 2 or 3 every week. You'll find those on Instagram. So follow us wherever you can. If you want to follow me personally, I am The Health Daddy. You can find me on Instagram, and The Health Daddy also on Facebook and the other one, Twitter. Follow us wherever you can. Spread the word. Tomorrow we have a brilliant interview with Dr. Malcolm Kendrick. We're going to be talking about lots of things around the heart, but also around COVID. And then we'll end this mini series of 50 episodes with the brilliant Unwins on Monday. In the interim, if you can, make a small donation to Just Giving and help put meals on the table of those across the UK. That would be massively, massively appreciated. And at the same time, as you drop into your local supermarket, if you can in the collection box, add some food. That food will go directly to support those in your local community. Thank you to everybody for some absolutely fabulous questions today. And we look forward to seeing you, Jack and myself, bright and early again tomorrow at 10 a.m.
Just as being fresh. Woohoo!